Some people never had a childhood, they just had smaller bodies and bigger responsibilities. They learned how to read a room before they learned how to relax. They could sense tension in silence, disappointment in footsteps, and danger in ordinary conversations. And somewhere along the way, the adults around them started calling that maturity. What looks like early maturity often begins as adaptation, not actual wisdom. It starts when a child realizes being easy is safer than being real. When home feels unpredictable, growing up fast can feel like armor. You stop reaching outward for comfort and start monitoring everything around you instead. You become thoughtful, careful, helpful, and strangely exhausted in ways nobody expects from a child. Adults praise you because you are calm, reasonable, and never too much. They do not always notice that you became calm by swallowing panic. They do not see how often your body stayed braced for moods that changed quickly. So you get older carrying a strange split deep inside you. One part of you seems almost impossibly capable for your age and circumstances. The other part still waits for a safe place to finally be messy. That is the hidden psychology of people who matured too early. They were not born older than everyone else, just forced to become emotionally useful early. They learned survival in places where softness did not feel protected enough. And survival can look incredibly impressive, polished, and mature from the outside. It can sound like emotional intelligence when it is really hyper-awareness and overdrive. It can look like independence when it is really disappointment rehearsed so often it feels normal. It can look like wisdom when it is actually exhaustion with excellent posture. People who matured too early usually became quiet experts at anticipation and emotional forecasting. They notice tiny shifts in tone before anyone else even hears them. They can feel a conflict coming long before the first sharp word lands. They know when to stay quiet, when to joke, and when to disappear. That skill usually did not come from nowhere or from some magical natural gift. It came from environments where being emotionally unprepared felt costly, embarrassing, or even unsafe. Maybe you had to comfort a parent who should have comforted you. Maybe you became the peacekeeper between adults who never learned to peace themselves. Maybe you learned that your feelings only mattered when they stayed convenient. Maybe nobody said that directly, but your nervous system still understood it. Children are unbelievably smart when it comes to tracking emotional weather inside a home. They read patterns long before they have the language to describe those patterns. And once a child learns safety depends on self-control, development changes shape. They become less spontaneous, more observant, and far more responsible than anyone should expect. They start managing other people's impressions before they have a chance to understand their own identity. That is why early maturity can feel impressive and lonely at once. You may have been the responsible one, but never the held one. The dependable one, but not always the one who felt deeply understood or emotionally protected. People leaned on you before they ever really looked at you. And when that happens long enough, usefulness quietly starts replacing selfhood from the inside. You begin asking who you are when nobody needs anything from you. That question can feel terrifying instead of freeing, because need gave your role structure. Many early matured people struggle in relationships for exactly this reason, even when they seem secure. They know how to care, but not always how to receive care. They know how to listen, but not always how to ask. They can hold space for everyone's pain, then hide their own confusion. When someone finally says, "What do you need?" their mind goes strangely blank. Not because they are empty, but because nobody trained them to answer. Their needs were often edited before they were ever spoken aloud. So adulthood can become a quieter continuation of the same emotional performance. They become the friend who always shows up composed, even when they are unraveling privately. The partner who seems steady but flinches at being fully seen. The coworker everyone trusts because they almost never let their overwhelm show on the surface. Meanwhile, their inner world feels like a room with no off switch. They replay conversations other people forgot before bedtime, searching for meanings hidden between harmless words. They over-explain simple choices because being misunderstood still feels oddly dangerous. They apologize quickly, even when they are not fully wrong, because repair became reflexive. They struggle to rest without guilt because rest once looked irresponsible. Even joy can feel suspicious when your body grew up around unpredictability. Here's the part most people completely miss about early maturity in another person. Growing up fast does not mean growing evenly across every emotional part of a person. Some parts of you develop early because they absolutely have to protect the rest. Other parts freeze quietly in the age where safety stopped making sense. So you can be deeply perceptive and still feel strangely young in love. You can give incredible advice and still panic when conflict turns personal. You can handle emergencies calmly and still crumble over small rejections later. None of that means you are broken, fake, or secretly less mature than others. It means your development followed necessity instead of natural emotional timing for a while. And necessity is often a terrible architect when tenderness is supposed to be learned. People who matured too early often have a complicated relationship with control. Control feels like competence, but also like the only guardrail keeping life manageable. They organize, plan, prepare, and mentally rehearse 3 conversations ahead before anything even happens. Not because they love structure that much, but because surprises once carried emotional consequences. When your early world felt unstable, predictability became deeply seductive to your whole nervous system. So now uncertainty can trigger more than simple discomfort, even in perfectly ordinary moments. It can trigger old vigilance wearing new clothes with adult names in modern settings. A delayed text suddenly feels bigger than a delayed text. A tense meeting at work feels heavier than a tense meeting should realistically feel. Someone's silence can light up an entire private history inside you before logic arrives. This is why people who matured too early often look calm while feeling flooded. Their outer behavior does not always match their inner load. They have spent years, sometimes decades, quietly perfecting that mismatch for survival. It is hard to explain your exhaustion when you still look extremely capable and functional. It is hard to describe loneliness when people keep admiring how strong you seem. Hard to admit you need softness when everyone depends on your stability. So many early matured people become emotionally invisible in plain sight. They are often seen as solid and dependable, but not especially sensitive underneath. They are called mature, but not necessarily treated with the tenderness they quietly need. And that creates a strange grief that is difficult to name. Because part of you is proud of what you survived, and another part deeply resents how much that survival quietly cost your inner life. You may grieve a version of yourself you never got to meet. The louder version, the sillier version, the one who trusted first. The version who asked for help without rehearsing how deserving they sounded. The version who did not confuse being low maintenance with being lovable. That grief is real, even if your life looks successful now. And acknowledging that grief does not erase your strength, it finally makes it honest. It actually gives your strength more human shape instead of a polished survival mask. Because real maturity is not the same as premature self-denial. Real maturity includes limits, messiness, dependency, repair, and enough honesty to stop performing. It allows you to be wise without disappearing inside the role of the wise one. That difference matters far more than most people realize until their life starts feeling hollow. Maybe this shows up when friends call only when things fall apart. Maybe family still treats you like the stable one who can take it. Maybe partners love your calmness, then get confused by your hidden distance. Maybe you seem available, but intimacy makes your body tighten before your mind catches up. Maybe you spend alone time recovering, not because you hate people, but because monitoring drains you. Maybe silence feels peaceful only after everyone finally stops needing something from you. And maybe the hardest part is how normal this all feels. Because if early maturity shaped you, over-functioning can feel like personality. You may call yourself independent when you're actually accustomed to emotional self-containment. You may call yourself low drama when you are actually conflict avoidant and watchful. You may call yourself private when you are really protecting old bruises. None of those patterns make you weak, but they do deserve honest attention now. They were intelligent emotional responses to the environment you add, not character defects. Protective responses can quietly outlive the danger that first created them in your early life. And when they do, they start shaping relationships that never actually asked for them. That is when self-awareness becomes less of a luxury and more of a release. Not the kind of self-awareness that harshly judges everything you feel before it even lands. The kind that notices your patterns with gentleness, curiosity, and much better timing. The kind that says, this reaction makes sense, but it may not be current. The kind that slowly separates old responsibility from present reality, one moment at a time. Healing for early matured people often looks strangely unglamorous at first. It can look like pausing before automatically fixing someone else's feelings. It can look like telling the truth when your first instinct is smoothing everything over. It can look like resting before you have fully earned rest. It can look like needing reassurance without insulting yourself for needing it. It can look like choosing people who do not only admire your strength. People who mature too early do not need to become less deep. They need spaces where depth is not the only thing they bring. They need relationships where care can flow both directions without constant negotiation or guilt. They need permission to be complicated, unproductive, emotional, and still fully worthy. And maybe most of all, they need a new definition of adulthood. One that does not confuse numbness with composure, or silence with genuine inner peace. One that makes room for softness without calling it regression. One that understands strength should not cost you your entire inner child. Because the goal was never to become unshakable, unreadable, and permanently easy for others. The goal was to become whole enough to stop surviving every ordinary moment. If you matured too early, you probably know how to hold everything together. But maybe your next chapter is not about holding everything together anymore. Maybe it is about noticing what falls apart when you finally put it down. Maybe it is about meeting the self that had to wait in the background. The self beneath the competence, beneath the usefulness, beneath the practice calm, everyone trusted. The self who still wants warmth without having to earn it first. The self who was called mature when they were really just adapting alone. That self is not childish, for still hurting, or needy for still wanting repair. That self is the evidence that something precious stayed alive. Even after all the early pressure, something in you kept waiting for gentler conditions. And maybe that waiting was never weakness at all, but wisdom refusing to disappear. Maybe the deepest maturity is finally letting yourself be met. Not managed, not admired from afar, but actually met in your real emotional weight. Not praised for being easy while your inner life goes untranslated. Not loved only for how little trouble you cause or how much you can absorb. Met clearly, gently, and without requiring the polished performance you built to survive. Because people who mature too early are often carrying two stories at once. One story is how capable, perceptive, and resilient they somehow became under pressure. The other story is what that capability quietly covered up and postponed for later. Both stories matter if you ever want to feel fully known by yourself. Both deserve language, compassion, and a life that no longer rewards your self-erasure. And both can be true without canceling each other, diminishing each other, or competing. You were strong in ways no child should have been asked to become. And you deserve far more softness, guidance, and protection than you probably received. If that lands somewhere deep inside you, there's a very human reason for it. Some truths do not make you dramatic, they make you accurate. And that kind of accuracy can become the beginning of peace instead of shame. So if you matured too early, maybe stop asking why you are this way. Start asking what you had to become to stay connected, safe, or needed. That question holds far more compassion than blame ever could, and far more direction. Because once you understand the role you built, you can finally begin loosening it. Once you see the armor clearly, you do not have to worship it. And once you stop confusing adaptation with identity, something quiet and necessary begins opening. Not a perfect life, and not some overnight transformation that erases every old reflex. Just a truer life where your tenderness is no longer treated like a liability. A life where being mature no longer means being alone inside yourself,